Nah, I done grew up around some people living their life in bottles. Granddaddy had the golden flask, back door every day in Chicago. Some people like the way it feels, some people want to kill their sorrows.
Hey guys, this is Karsh with UPro Gaming, back again with another Diablo III Barbarian build guide. Today we're going to be looking at what is widely regarded as the best Barbarian build, the Charge Barb. Now, in order to run the Charge Barb effectively, we're going to need to make use of two of our Barbarian class sets. We're going to be using the Raycor along with the Immortal King set. In total, we're going to need 3 pieces of Raycor to go along with 5 pieces of Immortal Kings. And these pieces are interchangeable, except for we will need the weapon and the belt from the Immortal King set because there is no alternative for Raycor. And then for Raycor, we're going to need the shoulders. But any other mixing and matching will do just fine as long as you have 5 Immortal Kings and 3 Raycors when it's all said and done. For the Immortal Kings portion, I'm going to be running with the helmet, the belt, the pants, the weapon, and the gloves. Immortal King's 2-piece saying, Call of the Ancients, last until they die. That's going to be great for the damage mitigation that we're going to need to have. The 4-piece saying, reduce the cooldown of Wrath of the Berserker and Call of the Ancients by 3 seconds for every 10 fury you spend with an attack. And then the 6-piece set, while both Wrath of the Berserker and Call of the Ancients are active, you deal 1500% increased damage. And then for the Raycor portion, I'm going to be running with the shoulders, the boots, and the chest piece. The 2-piece of Raycor saying that Furious Charge resets if it only hits one enemy. That's going to be great for killing off the Rift Guardian and then also the pesky elites that you have running around. And then the 4-piece set saying Furious Charge gains the effect of every rune and its damage is increased by 1000%. That's a great damage multiplier, and then also we're going to be getting the knockback, stun, freeze, the cooldown, and the extra charges. Next, let's look at the stat priorities that you're going to want on every piece of gear. For our helmet, we're going to want Strength, Vitality, and Critical Hit Chance. We're going to be running that with an Amethyst because we're not going to be working any cooldown into this build outside of what we're getting from our Paragon. For our chest piece, we're going to want it to roll with Strength, Vitality, and Furious Charge damage. You can get Furious Charge damage on your chest and on your shoulders. You're going to want it in both of those. On your belt, you're going to want it to roll Strength, Vitality, All Resist, and Life Per Fury Spent. We can get Life Per Fury Spent on our belt and on our weapon. We're going to want it in both of those because we're going to want the extra healing. For your pants, you're going to want it to run with Strength, Vitality, and Armor, and then get secondary resistances and pickup radius wherever you can. And then for our boots, we're going to want it to roll with Strength, Vitality, All Resist, and Armor. For your shoulders, you're going to want Strength, ideally either Life Percent or Vitality, Area Damage, and Furious Charge damage. For our gloves, we're going to want Strength, Critical Hit Damage, Critical Hit Chance, and Area Damage. The more area damage you can get, the better, so you can spread that Furious Charge damage around some. For our weapon, we're going to want our damage range, Strength. I like to run it with area damage, but you could replace this with damage percent. And then we're definitely going to want Life Per Fury Spent, and then the affix that you can't get rid of, the increases Call of the Ancients damage by X. Next, let's look at our rings. Firstly, we're going to be running with a Convention of Elements. You're going to want that to roll with Critical Hit Damage, Critical Hit Chance, and Area Damage. Convention of Elements saying gain up to 200% increased damage to a single element every 4 seconds. As a Barbarian, we rotate through 4 elements. We're going to be using Physical here. And then for our other ring, we're going to be taking a Band of Might. You're going to want that to run with Critical Hit Damage, Critical Hit Chance, and Area Damage also. Band of Might saying after casting Furious Charge, Ground Stomp, or Leap, take 80% reduced damage for 8 seconds. It's awesome for damage mitigation. Next, let's look at our amulet. We're going to be running with a Hellfire amulet. We want that to roll with physical skill damage, critical hit damage, and critical hit chance. And we're going to want that with one of the 5 passives that we're using here. I'm running it with Nerves of Steel to give me an extra life. And then lastly, for our bracers, we're going to be taking the Ancient Parthan Defenders, which say each stunned enemy within 25 yards reduces your damage taken by up to 12%. And remember that Furious Charge does give us a stun effect, so this is going to be very, very useful. Next, let's look at what we got in the cube. First, we're going to be running with the Standoff, which says Furious Charge deals increased damage equal to 500% of your bonus movement speed. That's why we're taking the Wreath of Lightning. It gives us 25% additional movement speed while lightning is striking. And then it's also why we're going to be taking Sprint for the additional movement speed. The 40% is going to give us 200% increased damage on top of everything else. Next, we're going to be taking Vile Ward, which says Furious Charge deals up to 35% increased damage for every enemy hit while charging. And you're generally going to be charging in a big group, so that equals really, really big damage. And then lastly, we're taking the Ring of Royal Grandeur, which says reduce the number of set items needed for bonuses by 1. And that's really helpful because we only have space to take 5 pieces of Immortal Kings and 3 pieces of Raycor. So we're getting the 4 and the 6 while we're only taking 3 and 5 respectively. And you could, in theory, replace your Ring of Royal Grandeur with one of the 2 rings that you're wearing, but Ring of Royal Grandeur is very, very difficult to roll well because it always rolls with an attack speed value, and that does absolutely nothing for this build. Alright, now on to the legendary gems. Firstly, we're going to be taking a Bane of the Stricken, which says each attack you make against an enemy increases the damage it takes from your attacks by X, depending on the level. And then at level 25, it says gain 25% increased damage against bosses and Rift Guardians. Next, we're going to be taking Wreath of Lightning, which says 15% chance on hit to gain a Wreath of Lightning, dealing X amount of weapon damage depending on the level as lightning every second to nearby enemies for 3 seconds. That damage is almost completely negligible. What we're actually after is the level 25 effect, which says while under the effect of Wreath of Lightning, gain 25% additional movement speed, which equals out with our standoff to 125% increased damage. And then for your last legendary gem is where you have a little bit of wiggle room. You could take a Bane of the Trapped, which says increased damage against enemies under the effect of control impairing effects by X depending on the level. And then at level 25 it says gain an aura that reduces the movement speed of enemies within 15 yards by 30%, so it gives you the effect for free to give you the additional damage. And then on the other hand, if you feel like you're dealing enough damage but taking too much, you could take an Esoteric Alteration, which says gain X amount non-physical damage reduction depending on the level, of course, and then at level 25, while below 50% life, your resistances to everything but physical are increased by 75%. Alright, now we're on to the skills. For our passes, we're going to be taking Nerves of Steel to give us an extra life. Next, we're going to be taking Ruthless, which says you deal 40% additional damage to enemies below 40% health. It's obviously very, very handy for killing off elites, Rift Guardians, and almost anything else. Next, we're going to be taking Rampage, which says increase strength by 1% for 8 seconds after killing or assisting in killing an enemy. This effect stacks up to 25 times. It's going to be a huge damage and toughness boost, as everybody knows. Strength for Barbarians and Crusaders is completely irreplaceable. Next, we're going to be taking Brawler, which says as long as there are 3 enemies within 12 yards, which there almost always will be, all of your damage is increased by 20%. Another huge damage multiplier. And then lastly, we're going to be taking Berserker Rage, which says you deal 25% additional damage while near maximum fury, and because you generate fury based on how many enemies you hit, you will be at maximum fury a good chunk of the time. And then for the rest of our skills, we're going to be taking Call of the Ancients with Together as one for the damage mitigation. Pay attention to your Ancients though. If they die, you will be taking massive amounts of damage. Next, we're going to be taking Sprint with Marathon to give us additional movement speed for the additional damage using our standoff. With the Marathon rune, we get an extra 10% movement speed and it lasts for an additional 1 second. You want to try to keep this up as often as you possibly can. Next, we're going to be taking the staple to every Barbarian build that I know of, Wrath of the Berserker with Insanity. It gives you a huge critical hit chance boost, attack speed, dodge chance, and movement speed, and then also with Insanity you're getting 50% increased damage on top of everything else. Next, we're going to be taking Battle Rage with Bloodshed, which says enter a rage which increases your damage by 10% and critical hit chance by 3%, lasts for 2 minutes. And then with the Bloodshed rune, we're going to be getting deal damage equal to 20% of your recent critical hits to enemies within 20 yards every 1 second. So this, on top of your area damage, helps you spread your Fury's charge damage out even further. Next, we're going to be taking Ancient Spear with Boulder Toss as our Fury dump, so we can reset our cooldowns on Wrath of the Berserker and Call of the Ancients to keep our 1500% additional damage boost from the Immortal King set. You could take Seismic Slam Rumble in place of Ancient Spear, but the animation for Ancient Spear is a lot faster, so generally you want to use this one. Next, we're going to be taking Furious Charge with Merciless Assault, and it doesn't really matter which rune you take here, it's all dependent on the elemental damage of your choice. Whichever one's on your bracers and amulet, that's what you're going to want to take. I'm taking physical, so I could either take the Merciless Assault or Stamina rune. It doesn't really matter since we're getting the effect of every rune. And lastly, for our Paragon points, in our core, we're going to be taking all of our movement speed. We're going to be maxing out our Fury so that we have more to dump to help reduce our cooldowns faster, and then after that we're dumping everything into strength. For our offense, we're going to be taking critical hit chance first, and then damage, and then cooldown reduction, and then attack speed, since it's basically worthless in this build. For our defense, we're going to be taking life, resist all, armor, and then life regen. And then for utility, we're going to be taking area damage, life per hit, resource cost reduction, and gold find. Guys, when you're running this build, make sure you're very careful about how many enemies you're charging into, because we're not running any cooldown. We have to rely on how many enemies we're hitting to reset our charges for us. So if you're consistently running into anywhere between 2 and 4 packs, you're going to be eating up charges, and you're going to have to wait to charge again. So just be conscious of how many charges you have and how many enemies you're rushing into, especially on the Rift Guardian, because some of them spawn only a couple of adds, so you could get stuck fairly easily with no charges left if you're not using them wisely. And lastly, guys, just a disclaimer, I am not a professional with this build. I did try to practice with it a little bit, because I used to run it a bunch back in the day, and not so recently, but at the beginning of 2.6.1, I ran it for a while. But lately I've been pushing with Hoda, and I seem to prefer that. I like the playstyle a little bit more, so I hope you guys forgive me for my blasphemy of not running charge. Alright guys, that's all I got for you today. I hope you enjoyed the build and the Rift. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you with the next one.
Many Nephilim have stood where you are. Not enough fury. You cannot stand before me. No way. I can't. I need fury. I need more fury. Impossible. Heal.
That is what I am trained
Not
for.
enough fury. Back to hell. More fury. Guide thy hand. No way. I need healing. I need fury. Fury recharge. Not enough fury. Not ready yet. I am back. can't. More fury. No way. I can't. No way. I saw you. I grow weak. Ate it.
Nah, I done grew up around some people living their life in bottles. Granddaddy had the golden flask, back no bigger day in Chicago. Some people like the way it feels, some people want to